Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you all to a very special conversation with Elizabeth Lesser and Suelika Jaouad. They both have their own personal connection to the cancer community, and I'm so thankful to them both for sharing their stories with us today. They are two of the most amazing women and such thoughtful thinkers. We are all fortunate to be hearing from them both on the same Zoom. Before I turn it over to Elizabeth and Suelika, I want to extend my sincerest thanks to our co-chairs, Peggy Bittler, Amy Eberly, and Claudia Overstrom. Thank you for your continued support and tireless efforts to make today's virtual event so successful. You know how much this means to me, both personally and professionally. Thank you also to our generous supporters. The proceeds from this event will continue to support the Bone Marrow and Cancer Foundation's various financial and emotional support programs for patients and families, and allow us to continue to be a lifeline to so many. We have patient navigators to help guide patients and families through the healthcare system, and our programs help patients overcome barriers to receiving the care they need. We also have oncology therapists available 24/7. Before COVID-19, cancer was a crisis under normal circumstances, and unfortunately, the pandemic has only compounded these stressors for patients and their families. So our programs, our navigators, and our counselors are needed now more than ever before. With a cancer diagnosis, life is abruptly interrupted, and our support to patients and families is critical in the most profound ways. Suelika's New York Times Life Interrupted video will provide you with a glimpse into what Suelika and her family faced when her life was so abruptly interrupted by cancer, and what it is like for so many others when their lives are suddenly turned upside down by this disease.
Cancer doesn't just put your life on hold. It's not like you get to skip back a few months and pick up exactly where you left off. I wasn't going to get my old life back. Being in your early 20s is a strange thing to live with a life-threatening disease. And I remember as he said the words, acute myelogenous leukemia, it felt as though he slapped me across the face.
She said they've scheduled the bone marrow biopsy for Friday.
When I was first diagnosed, I think I felt pretty terrified. I'd never really seen anyone who was very sick.
So we'll be back. When should I expect to have the results of my bone marrow biopsy? Probably.
And the more ill I got, the more isolated I began to feel. I think part of it was that I had never really experienced physical pain. I'd never even broken a bone, and so coping with that was really shocking.
I don't know. I don't know words for it. It's just, I feel like I'm the mother. I need to be holding myself together. If you're a parent of a child is one thing. As parents of a young adult, you have to be careful. We still want to do everything for her. But you learn that doing everything for her, or to have her, is not necessarily what she wants. So you got to learn to step back and to be useless and accept it. And it's very hard.
This is the best one?
Yeah. I used to be so afraid of needles. Really? Even through the first few months of my treatment. I still am sometimes.
But now you're used already.
Now I'm used to it. I still can't look though.
Yeah, don't look.
So when I found out that I would need 6 months of chemotherapy treatments and move permanently into my childhood room, I felt really angry. The goal had always been to learn how to be sort of an independent adult in the real world. And suddenly everything that I had worked for had vanished. My apartment, my independence, my job, everything. I wouldn't say that cancer is a gift, but I've learned a tremendous amount from going through this. My priorities are different. My goals for the future are different. I see the world differently. I see myself differently. For me, initially losing my hair was a pretty traumatic experience. I felt unattractive and I felt like I was losing a part of my identity. I'd always been a girly girl. I liked wearing dresses, I liked wearing high heels. And when I lost my hair, subconsciously I started embracing this new, edgier aesthetic. I've basically put all of my peasant dresses in storage and have adopted a leather jacket and boots with spikes on them. Here we go. You know, people look at me very differently to how they looked at me before when I had long hair. And I really feel tougher and a little bit braver. Ah, much cleaner. In these many months of sitting in bed, I've discovered that I really love to write. But before I got sick, I never felt brave enough to actually put myself out there. So I started a blog, and all the thoughts I'd been having for the past year and all of these experiences just kind of came flooding out. Up until that point, I'd kept my story very private. And suddenly I had this new support system that had kind of formed out of nowhere. When I was first diagnosed with leukemia, I found out I was also going to need a bone marrow transplant. My transplant is my only shot at a cure. And now that it's so soon, it's becoming increasingly difficult for me to block out all the risks and all the fears. I think I'm also just tired. My body's tired. I feel like I've suffered a lot physically in the past year, and the idea of going through something that's going to be even more intense than anything I've experienced before scares me a lot.
That was so powerful, Suelika. Thank you for sharing your story and helping other patients feel less alone during their battle to survive. It's a gift you have given to so many, and now especially through your book, Between Two Kingdoms. Thank you. It is my great pleasure now to introduce you to my friend, Elizabeth Lesser, author of several best-selling books, including Broken Open, Marrow, and her most recent book, Cassandra Speaks. Elizabeth is the co-founder of the Omega Institute, recognized internationally for its workshops and conferences in wellness, spirituality, creativity, and social change. She has also given 2 popular TED Talks and is one of Oprah Winfrey's Super Soul 100, collection of 100 leaders who are using their voices and talent to elevate humanity. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here today. Now I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Christina. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining. It's just such a pleasure to be with you. Oh, hi, Suelika.
Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And that video, Suelika, whoa, when we left you as you were about to embark into the kingdom of the really, really sick, that's what I call the kingdom of a bone marrow transplant. And it's so wonderful to see you here. Look at you, as your father's tradition would say, Alhamdulillah, praise God. Look at you now, so healthy and beautiful. So we're happy to see that. And there's a lot of territory that you crossed between the two kingdoms, as you call it in your book. And we're going to be talking about that territory. But first, I just want to say to everyone, thank you for supporting the Bone Marrow and Cancer Foundation. This organization has a very special place in my heart because I too have been involved in bone marrow transplant. I'll get to that later. But also, I love the foundation because I love Christina Merrill. She is just like a health activist is what I like to think of her as. This foundation is so creative, and so she has been so dogged in elevating the needs that bone marrow and cancer patients and their caretakers have. So if you feel like doing so, please support them today. You see that little picture there with the text and the phone number, and you can also go to their website. So thank you everyone for considering supporting the foundation. So I met Suelika the way many people met you, Suelika, which is through your New York Times blog and videos called the Life Interrupted series in the New York Times. And you started that when you were just 22 years young, when you were first diagnosed with leukemia and given a 35% chance of survival. And that's how I got to know you. And I fell in love with your vulnerability and your strength, both of those things, which is a rare combo in people. And then I met you several years later when Christina Merrill invited me to speak at a foundation fundraiser back when we could meet in beautiful restaurants and conference rooms. And the night before, she seated me next to you at a dinner. And I was sort of starstruck is the weird way to say what I felt about you, because I had met you through your blog. And then I felt like we were long lost friends, and not just because of the blog, but we're both kind of introverts who pretend we're extroverts. Maybe all writers are like that. And then also I had just published my book, Marrow, which is about being my sister's bone marrow donor and going through all of that with her. So since that meeting, you have been doing amazing things. You have taken a road trip across America to meet and thank some of your blog pen pals. And you've been writing powerful articles and op-eds for the New York Times. And then you've got this incredible online creativity club called the Isolation Journals. And of course, your extraordinary, best-selling, amazing book, Between Two Kingdoms. So I want to start with my first question. It's really just, can you set the stage for us? Like, especially for people who haven't read the book. Who were you? Where were you? What were you up to when you first became aware that, maybe these aren't normal feelings for a 20-year-old?
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that beautiful introduction. And I just want to say that experience of starstruckenness was entirely mutual. It was one of those love at first sight friendships. And I'm so grateful to have you in my life and to get to be in conversation with you today. So, back in 2010, I had just graduated from college. And I think, like a lot of recent college graduates, I felt both excited and a little terrified about the notion of entering the real world, as we like to say in graduation speeches. And, I had these aspirations of becoming a journalist, although I had no idea about how to go about making that dream into a reality. And I think, like a lot of young people, um, I had this feeling of time. I had time to figure it out, time to figure out who I was and how I was going to make my way into that real world. And the future felt limitless with possibility. And so what I ended up doing was getting a job as a paralegal at a law firm in Paris, and I moved abroad. And I was very excited to get to live in Paris, what 22-year-old wouldn't be. But during those months in Paris, I wasn't feeling well. What began with this mysterious itch kind of blossomed into pretty extreme fatigue. I would take naps in the utility closet at the law firm during my lunch break. And I was constantly kind of coming down with different colds and bouts of bronchitis. But I think, until you get sick, um, that specter of life-threatening illness, of mortality, isn't really something that we ever think is going to happen to us. And that was true for me. I took my fatigue as evidence that I somehow wasn't cut out for the real world, that it was some kind of personal failing, that I was struggling to keep up at work, that I couldn't seem to walk up a couple of flights of stairs without getting winded. And over the course of that year, I went to see a number of doctors. Each one would send me home with an antibiotics prescription or tell me to get some rest. And ultimately, I was hospitalized for a week in Paris and released with a diagnosis of burnout syndrome. Now, even then, I knew I didn't have a medical degree, but something about burnout syndrome didn't add up for me. And I began to feel this strange dissonance between what I was being told and what I started to suspect might be a more serious illness or something that was happening in my body. And I think that that sense of dissonance is really confusing, and it's not an uncommon experience for patients, especially young adult patients, to go through weeks or many months of misdiagnosis before they arrive at their actual diagnosis. So when I flew home to upstate New York and underwent the bone marrow biopsy that led to my actual diagnosis, which was acute myeloid leukemia, my first very fleeting reaction was a strange one, but I felt profound relief. Relief to have a diagnosis that I could actually utter out loud and that I could hopefully do something about. Relief to know that I wasn't a hypochondriac, or really kind of losing my mind, which was what it felt like at moments in the year leading up to my diagnosis. And of course, that relief very quickly evaporated and was replaced with fear and shock and anger. And I'll truly never forget that day. I think none of us, who've experienced receiving a diagnosis, either yourselves or hearing a loved one get a diagnosis, forget what it's like to hear those words.
Yeah, I remember when my sister got her first diagnosis, she literally fainted and fell off the table. And, the year before she was diagnosed, for whatever reason, I was so enamored with your blog, which insanely enough, you were writing all during that experience that you just described. I clipped every single one out of the New York Times and underlined a lot. And then a year later, my little sister was diagnosed with a very difficult stage 4 lymphoma. and she needed a bone marrow transplant. And I remember you writing in, or maybe it's in the book, in the blog or the book or both, that you're the kind of person when trauma hits or you go into research mode. You know, there are some people who like don't want to know anything. Don't tell me anything. Just do what you need to do, doctors. I don't want to know, no, like that. I'm the opposite, like you. I go into extreme research mode. So when my sister got sick and I found out she needed a bone marrow transplant, and then I, of all the 4 girls in our family, was the only one who tested as her match. And I tested like your brother did as her perfect match. I started reading up everything I could about bone marrow transplant. And it is so fascinating and miraculous. And I wanted to know not only what was going to happen to me and to her, but also what might happen afterwards. And I found out about this thing called graft versus host disease, and the way my bone marrow cells would go into her body and they might attack her, or she might reject them. And I thought, reject and attack, that sounds like something we've done our whole life with each other. And so we went about kind of cleaning up our relationship. So hopefully maybe my cells would behave once in her body and vice versa. So I'm wondering, what was it like for you and your brother? What was it like for your brother? And did it affect him? And what's it like now? Did it change your relationship? You know, all of your blood now comes from his bone marrow. So do you feel like him, or what's that like?
Well, so my brother is here today with us. Hi,
Oh,
Adam.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Adam.
Um, you know, my brother and I have always been so close, and I think he holds the title of the funniest person in our family. And, you know, at the time of my diagnosis, he was a junior in college. He was studying abroad in Argentina. And when he learned that he needed to be tested as a potential donor match, immediately took a leave from his program, got on a plane, and came home. And I'll never forget one of the first things he said to me, which was "Hello, Suleikemia," which is my new nickname. And it was such a kind of off-color, twisted joke, but it made us laugh and laugh and laugh. And only a little brother can get away with giving you a new cancer-inspired nickname. But that was really, you know, a big part, I think, of how we endured what came next. We had to find those moments of levity. We had to try to hold on to our normal sibling dynamic. And also, I think it was incredibly challenging. It's a lot of pressure to be someone's donor. And I know Adam felt that, although he never told me that himself. But I remember him later telling my mom that he felt like if my transplant didn't work, it would somehow be his fault. And I think, you know, no matter what type of cancer someone has, to be the sibling, especially when you're so young, of someone with cancer is a really difficult experience. All the resources, all the focus are directed at the cancer patient. And there's not a lot of room, and there's not often a lot of resources or support for caregivers in general, but especially siblings. And, you know, I love what you said, Elizabeth, about you and your sister repairing your relationship to try to avoid any sort of rejection or attack. And I think, you know, that was a challenging thing for us to know, you know, what to do in that waiting period. So much of cancer is waiting for test results, waiting for biopsy results, waiting for better days. And in our case, it was, you know, almost a year from diagnosis until when I received my actual bone marrow transplant that we had to wait. And I know, you know, for my parents, they were very worried They wanted my brother not to stay out too late, not to drink too much at parties, to really just try to stay as healthy as possible in preparation for that transplant, which was its own kind of pressure, even if it was coming from a good place. But the kind of miracle, I think, of bone marrow transplants, like you said, is that your blood is entirely your donor's. So not only did my blood type change to my brother's, but I lost all of my childhood allergies and now have all of his allergies. So it used to be that I was allergic to peanuts. I now eat peanut butter practically every day, but I have every seasonal allergy known to man. Thank you for that, Adam. It's a very small price to pay to be alive. But transplants truly feel like miracles, and we've come so far in our ability not just to prepare patients and families for that bone marrow transplant experience, but to prepare them for the aftermath of it and the potential side effects that come with
Are
it.
you funnier?
I like to think I'm funnier, although Adam would probably disagree.
You can put that in the chat if you like, Adam. My sister was always worried because I'm sort of the woo-woo one in the family, and she's a tough person, a nurse practitioner. She was always afraid that she would become suddenly a spiritual. And her transplant was a miracle. She lived for a year. Sadly, she only lived for a year, but she said it was the best year of her life after the transplant, but it was also in many ways the worst year of her life. And she went through stuff that I'm really sorry I wasn't able to read your book before, because I learned so much from you about some of her responses, which were anger. She would be so angry. She would not want to see other people. She made me the gatekeeper. I had to tell people, including my other sister, my youngest sister, not to see her, which led to all sorts of terrible stuff in our family. And I never understood. So there's a passage in your book that I was hoping you might read. It starts on page 76, and you might want to set the scene a little first, but it opens a window for me into some of the way she was. And I would think all caregivers would be so helped by this passage.
So, there's a lot of pressure, I think, as a cancer patient to be someone who suffers well, someone who, stays strong and positive and is graceful and brave. And as much as I wanted to be all those things, as I got sicker, as the side effects of my treatment crept in, as the goalposts kept moving, it was harder and harder to keep that facade up. And one of the things that was really important to me in writing this book was to really give ink to the ways in which illness, and I think especially cancer, can bring us down to our most primal, savage selves, and not always in ways that are very flattering. So I'm going to read this passage, and it kind of speaks to the sort of strange social dynamics, I think, that emerge when you get a diagnosis. I was still allowed visitors from the outside, but even that had become complicated. The people I'd played beer pong with in college had not reached out, and even though I was not surprised, I felt wounded by their silence. Instead, I tried to focus on those who did show up. My friend Mara, who came to see me nearly every day, and a cohort of old childhood pals, classmates, and colleagues who stopped by with gifts. In the days after my diagnosis, I'd welcomed their company, even craved it. But over time, I grew allergic to the looks of pity and the positivity pushers who tried to cheer me up with their get well cards and their exhausting refrains of stay strong and keep fighting. I began to feel angry at people's trivial complaints about a stressful day at the office or a broken toe that meant they couldn't go to the gym for a couple of weeks. And it was hard not to feel left out when my friends told me about a concert or a party they'd been to together. Worse were the disaster tourists, those whom I didn't know well, but who came out of the woodwork, showing up unannounced at my hospital room door with an overzealous desire to help or to bear witness to the medical carnival that my life had become. They would gape at my bald head, all misty-eyed, and I'd find myself having to console them. Or they'd bombard me with unsolicited medical advice, telling me about a great doctor they knew, or a friend of a friend who'd cured their own cancer with things like essential oils, apricot kernels, coffee enemas, or a juice cleanse. I knew that most meant well and were doing the best they knew how. So I smiled and nodded, but I was silently fuming. As I got sicker, fewer and fewer came, and when they did, I began pretending to be asleep.
Wow. Yeah, my sister used to do that too, pretend she was asleep. And so what do you have to say to people? Because we all are going to have times or have had times or are having them now when we are caring for people we love or people we know who are sick. What helps? What's too much help? What is disaster tourism? What helped you? And I know it's probably different on every day, but what do you have to say to us?
I think cancer is socially very uncomfortable and awkward for a lot of friends and family members. And for some, when you don't know what to say, what that ends up looking like is not saying anything at all and staying away because of it. And I just want to say that, I was the recipient of that kind of silence, but I've also been the person who, even though I know better, and I know what a cruelty it is to be met with silence, have, for any number of reasons, just not found the words, not been in a place where I could show up in the way that I knew I should and I knew I wanted to. So I say this with no judgment. But I think one of the most helpful things, if you are hesitant or unsure of how to talk about it, is to just say that, to say, I don't know what to say right now. I'm scared for you. I love you. I want to be there and I'm not quite sure how, and to be honest. The other thing I would say as far as offering help is to be specific. I know that, friends or different people would reach out to me and say, if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. And if you're anything like me, I don't like asking for help. And I will never respond to that kind of text and say, well, yes, actually, here's what you can do. So I've always found it really helpful when someone offers a specific form of help and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you love mowing your lawn, then show up and mow someone's lawn. If you love cooking, then leave, a casserole or whatever it might be. If you love dogs, offer to dog sit. It doesn't have to be anything spectacular, but those small, simple gestures that are offered with a note that says, no pressure and no need to reply, I think are so welcome and so needed. I'd be curious for you, Elizabeth, what advice you have for friends and family members.
Well, one is, that I think what people want in any kind of trauma, in any kind of illness, or loss is your presence. You know, there are very few words to say. They've all been said. And just the power of sitting there and sitting there expecting nothing in return, and doing away with the discomfort. I know that in a way, the people I know who have been sick and I've been with, and from knowing you, Suelika, there's sort of a heightened sensitivity and almost like an animal instinct. You can feel if the person who's coming in there is uncomfortable, is a disaster tourist. And so, like, to the extent that I am able to be comfortable in my own skin and just able to be present with someone's pain, not try to fix it, because I can't, and not shy away from it, both at the same time, just like radically present in a calm, open way. I found in the year of taking care of my sister, in the end, that's what was left, that presence.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, to be able to sit with someone, even just in silence, and especially as a patient, to not feel like you need to perform in the sense that
Right.
you need to entertain them, or that you need to be feeling well enough that day to see someone, is such a gift. The other thing I would add, as far as not fixing, is, I found that um, I was carrying so much fear, and so much sadness, and I didn't know how or with whom I could share that. Because often, if I said things like, I have this frightening prognosis and I'm scared I'm going to die, which of course is the elephant in the room, the response I would most often be met with was, oh, don't say that. You have to stay positive. And I think to be able to meet each other with that kind of unvarnished honesty and vulnerability, and to not need to plaster over it or to
Right.
reassure, and to let someone speak to those fears, is also a tremendous gift, and a source of solace.
Yeah, and the platitudes, that's what would drive my sister the craziest. She came up with, I don't know if she came up with it or someone else said it. Don't say this is an AFGO, another fucking growth opportunity. Like, don't put in any of those things, the silver lining, the growth opportunities, like maybe later, but not now.
Totally. My other least favorite thing that I heard was, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Because of course, when you're very sick, it certainly feels like you've been given way more than you can handle.
Right. So I wanted to ask you about this 100-day project idea. The way you decided one of the ways to deal with your grief and fear and pain was to be creative, to somehow bring creativity to it. And I found that, I know my sister did that. She was a painter, and any chance she could get, she would hobble into her painting studio. So I want you to talk about this 100-day project, and talk about what it was like to lose your power to illness and then to take it back through creativity. And some people will hear that and they'll say, well, I'm not creative. I'm not a writer. I'm not a painter. I'm not creative. But your final 100-day project was your road trip, which you don't need to be a quote unquote artist to do. So talk about all of that.
Yeah. So, there's such a tremendous loss of control, both as a patient, but as a caregiver. You cede control to the kind of mysterious happenings in your body. You cede control to your medical team, to the ever-changing treatments. And I think one of the hardest things, and my mom said this often, was not knowing what we could do. She would say to me, I want to be able to do everything for you. And I can't. I want to be able to take this away and I can't. Um, but the one thing we did do that first summer in the hospital was this thing that we called the 100-Day Project. And the concept was really simple. We were each going to do one creative act every day for 100 days. And it gave us a way of kind of organizing our days around this small, tiny practice. And it gave us a sense of accountability and a way to kind of stay grounded during what was a really, really challenging summer. So my dad ended up writing 100 childhood memories about growing up in Tunisia that he later compiled into a little booklet and gave to me. My mom painted a ceramic tile every day that she later assembled into a shield and hung above my bed and told me it had protective powers. And for my 100-day, I decided to keep a journal. I wasn't feeling inspired. I certainly knew there was no chance of becoming the journalist that I'd imagined myself being, or traveling around the world or interviewing people. So I kept this journal and I had some really simple rules for myself. The first being that I had to do it every day, but that it didn't matter if it was any good, didn't matter how long it was. Often it was just a sentence. Sometimes it was just one word, occasionally the F word. But something interesting started to happen in doing that daily practice of journaling. I began to find language, my own language for what was happening to me. And that was its own kind of narrative control at a time when I had so little control over anything happening in my life. I began to observe the hospital around me. I would overheard, conversations at the nurse's coffee station. I would write about the fellow patients I was befriending. And really, what I began to understand in that process is that survival is its own kind of creative act, whether you're a creative person or an artist, doesn't matter. When you can't speak because the chemo sores in your mouth make it painful, you have to find other ways to communicate. When you're too tired to leave bed or you're stuck in a hospital room, you have to find new ways to travel. You need to start to use your imagination as its own kind of transportive vessel. When you're in medical isolation, you have to reimagine how you conceive of community and who's going to be in that. And that 100-day project, as simple as it was, really helped me kind of reimagine what I could do from my hospital bed. And, a big part of that was accepting my limitations. And then within those limitations, figuring out what it was that I could do. So ultimately, the contents of that journal became the material for the column and the video series I would later pitch to the New York Times. But really, I felt for the first time like I was finding my power again.
That I love how you said survival is a creative act, and I know that many of us in this pandemic and now semi-post pandemic time have been going through our own experiences of isolation and fear, and now re-emerging with the goalposts all having changed and everything being so different. And I keep praying that we won't squander this opportunity we've been given to make changes in some meaningful way. And I know that like meaning making meaning out of this experience has been important for you. You wrote something in one of the blog posts. I know this because I still have them in my filing cabinet. You wrote, survivorship comes with unspoken pressures, responsibilities, and challenges. After all, what's the point of saving a life if the life isn't a meaningful one? And I know I really feel that every day, thinking of, kind of, I want to live a meaningful life for my sister. And now I feel it for our country. Can we imbue this trauma we've gone through with meaning? So I wondered if you could read one of my favorite passages from the book, and it starts on page 338, and set the stage for us. It may be maybe a big scene setting, like the fact that you went on this road trip, and then bring us to this reading.
So after, almost 4 years in cancer treatment, I emerged from that experience feeling more lost than I'd ever felt. And that was a big shock to me. Of course, getting better had always been the goal. And I expected that when I reached that point, I would feel grateful and excited, and that I would quickly and organically kind of fold back into the rhythms of living. But that didn't happen. And I very quickly learned that in a lot of ways, the hard work of healing doesn't end with a cure. It's where it begins, at least on a personal level. And I was really, reckoning with what I'd been through for the first time. I was no longer in survival mode, and yet I had no idea how to live. And I was also struggling to figure out who I was in the aftermath of that experience. But unlike when you're in treatment, there aren't treatment protocols or really roadmaps to kind of guide your way forward after cancer. And so what I understood was that I was going to, in a way, have to create my own sort of rite of passage. We have funerals and weddings, we have bar mitzvahs, we have all kinds of ritual ceremonies that help us shoulder complicated feelings and that help us cross that distance between no longer and not yet. So the kind of rite of passage that I created for myself as I was emerging from all this was a 15,000-mile solo road trip around the country. Although I should note that I first had to learn how to drive before I left on that road trip. And what I did during those 100 days I spent on the road was I ended up visiting some of the unexpected strangers who'd been writing to me in response to the column and who were navigating their own reckonings. And one of the last people I visited was a death row inmate named Quentin Jones, or Little GQ, as he's called in the book. That's his nickname. And he had written me this beautiful letter about the unexpected parallels of isolation and facing mortality between our stories. Me in a hospital room bubble and him in solitary confinement on death row. So I'm just going to read this short passage from the end of my visit with him. Little GQ says he has never been sick in his life. He does 1,000 push-ups each morning to start off the day. But there's a lot about my cancer experience that he relates to. He understands what it's like to feel stuck in purgatory, awaiting the news of your fate. The loneliness and claustrophobia of being confined to a small room for endless stretches of time. How it's necessary to get inventive in order to keep yourself sane. These unexpected parallels are what initially compelled him to write to me. You face death in your own personal prison, just like I continue to face death in mine, Little GQ says. At the end of the day, death is death, doesn't matter the form it takes. We are trying so hard to reach through the plexiglass, to meet each other in shared territory we both understand. But what parallels exist between our experiences have their limitations. It's a tricky balance, attempting to find resonance in someone's story without reducing your suffering to sameness. Aside from the obvious differences in skin color and privilege, gender and education, the very fact that I am visiting little GQ while on a road trip underscores an oceanic difference. Mine is a body in motion, his is a body behind bars. But for the duration of our visit, we pretend otherwise, both of us acting as if we are in a coffee shop somewhere, just two people chatting away, trying, however imperfectly, to relate to each other. A tap on my shoulder makes me jump. It's a guard here to tell us it's 3 p.m. My time is up, little GQ says. Before I leave, he asks one final question. If you could take it all back, would you? If I could take it all back? I'm stunned. I don't know, I say quietly.
Oh, that always gets me. Really, people, you have to read this book. So, would you? And after you answer that impossible question, I want you to talk a little bit about what's happening with Quentin now.
You know, of course, when I think about the suffering my illness caused my family and my loved ones, I would do anything to spare them of that heartbreak and sorrow. But when I think of it abstracted from its impact on the people around me, when I think of all that came out of that time in the kingdom of the sick, the friendships I made with fellow cancer patients. Actually, behind me, I have a wall of paintings from young adult cancer patients, including some bone marrow transplant patients. When I think of those friendships, when I think of the way that illness, pushed me to kind of plumb new depths, to reimagine the world and my place in it, when I think of all the columns written, when I think of the ways in which this experience forced me to ask that question that you mentioned, Elizabeth, what does it mean to live a meaningful life? Then no, I wouldn't take back my illness. I wouldn't, take back what I suffered in order to gain this, which is really, I think, a more examined life and a commitment to leading an examined life. And I think about it too in the context of this pandemic. For all of us, it's been, undescribably difficult in all the ways that we know. But I keep thinking about what I want to carry forward with me from this experience. And there's so much. And so, without glossing over the real, grief and trauma of illness, without doing or saying what angered your sister Elizabeth so much, which, is that experiences like this are growth opportunities. What did you call them?
AFGO.
Yeah.
Another effing growth opportunity.
I do think that in moments like these, we have an invitation to make our own meaning and our own growth opportunities. We don't have to, but we can. And when we do, when we live into the possibilities of that knowledge that's acquired, I think there's something really powerful and beautiful and transformative that can transpire.
So beautiful. And one of the things that you are doing now as you attempt to drag some of what you learned and grew is you're using this time now to continue being a journalist and a writer and shining a light on those whose lives are often forgotten. And one of them is our friend Quentin sitting in his cell. And you have been doing the most remarkable work right now for him. Tell us a little bit about it. We have 4 minutes left, so let's end with Quentin's story.
Okay. So Quentin Jones is someone who I've now been corresponding with for a decade. He has been on death row for 21 years, since he was 20 years old. And he has spent that time doing what we're describing, which is living into the possibilities of the knowledge he's acquired. He's reckoned with his past. He's reconciled with his family. And he's really committed himself not just to growing, but to sharing those experiences with others. I was always struck by the fact that in all of our letters, he would tell me about his life, but mostly he wanted to know about mine. And he was always asking about my treatments and how they were going, and sending me messages of encouragement. And he's done that for so many other pen pals around the world. But Quinn is scheduled to be executed on Wednesday, May 19th. And so I actually ended up traveling back down to Texas last week to visit him on death row. And we filmed an interview where he spoke very beautifully about his plea for clemency. His family, who's also the victim's family, is asking for his life to be spared and for him to be allowed to live out the remainder of his natural life in prison. So that's been what I've been working on day and night for the last 2 weeks. I'm struck by how, the power of a single letter has, allowed him to show up in my life in my most difficult passage, and how now I have the opportunity to try and do the same for him. And I think, it really speaks to how in these incredibly difficult experiences like cancer or incarceration, very different, of course, we really learn and see the true importance of what it means to care, whether you're doctors who are caring for patients, whether you're a friend caring for a recently diagnosed cancer patient. But these moments are the moments of accountability that all relationships arc toward, what we do and how we show up.
Oh my gosh, that was so beautiful. It's also a beautiful segue first to say, Christina Merrill and the foundation shows up for so many people, and an easy way to do hard work is to support them in the work they do. And now also a chance for me to thank you, Suelika, for being with us, for being a friend, for being you. You are a light. And to thank all of you for being with us.